All right, Rambam for Friday, Chavdal Menachem Av, Tafshin Pei, the seventh and final Perek of Hilchos Talmud. So yesterday we were discussing the mitzvah of honoring Talmidei Chachamim. And the last portion of the Perek, we entered this whole discussion about nidui, putting someone in some kind of ban if he is disrespectful towards the Talmud Chacham. And the Beis Din could do it on behalf of the Talmud Chacham, or the Chacham could do it himself. We concluded yesterday with a list of 24 things that we give nidui for in general, one of which was the Bizu Talmud Chacham.
It wasn't not connected.
Yeah, and we went through it pretty quickly, and I just wanted to point out that each one will be mentioned in its appropriate place. Wherever those halachas are discussed, will be mentioned there as well. For some reason, the Rambam saw to it. He thought that it was important to make a list of all of them in one place, so that was what happened yesterday. And today, in the seventh and final Perek, the Rambam is going to continue on the subject of nidui in general, and a lot less about specifically the Talmud Chacham, just really about how nidui and cherem operate in general. Towards the end of Halacha Yud Gimel, we're going to circle back around to the Talmud Chacham and his attitude towards using the cherem and the nidui if he gets upset at someone. Okay.
It says that anybody can put somebody in nidui.
That's what we're going to get to here, really.
No,
Even yesterday. Right, but on behalf of the Talmud Chacham. The context yesterday was about the Talmud Chacham. And we all said, the last thing we said yesterday was that if you put someone in nidui for no reason, then you end up in nidui. So it's not just free for all. So the first halacha discusses nidui for a great chacham, putting a great chacham in nidui. So Rambam says, chacham zaken b'chachma, someone who's a sage, but not just any sage, it's an extraordinary sage. V'chein nasi, I have Beis Din, or those two very high levels that we had in time of Chazal, which we have, sometimes approximately today. They're of a city, perhaps a dayan. Shesarach, so they went way off the deep end. They're really their behavior is really problematic. So really, you should put them in nidui. However, we don't ever actually go public with a nidui ever. Unless it's so over the top, it's like what Yeravam did, people like that, they're causing people to serve a very desire. I mean, it's got to really cross some major lines. But if it's just personal problematic behavior, we don't take the normal actions. So that's if it's Yeravam. To get back to the regular sins, so we can give him klep, we can hit him, we can give him malchus of some sort privately, but that's it. We have to deal with it privately, not in public. Shenemar says in Heshev, so the context there is, you're going to be no good, and the Novi with you is going to be no good at night. But the drasha is, Afal Pisha Kashal, Kaseu Kalayla. Even if takes a misstep, does the wrong thing, we have to cover it up like the night. So, cover up. And the line that's used often in this context is the line we use in such a person is he kaved v'shev b'veisecha. Zayas a gut, do the right thing and stay home, and we send him the message privately. Now the question is, what does that actually mean? Does he kaved v'shev b'veisecha mean that he's fired and we're just keeping it quiet, or does it mean that he keeps his position and we're keeping it quiet? So there's actually a very today it's a relatively famous tshuva of the Tzemach Tzedek. It's one of the earliest, perhaps the earliest tshuva dealing with abuse. It's in Yeridea. So it was dealing with a Rav. He did something inappropriate, and he gave an excuse, which sounded a bit flimsy, but he gave some kind of excuse. And so the Tzemach Tzedek says that you have this halacha, zaken shesarach ein meridin oisei migdulas. It doesn't say these words here, but that's how it says it elsewhere in these words. Shalmi, the Beis Yosef, rephrase it that if a zaken, someone like this, does something wrong, we do not remove him from his position. And he says, according to that, in Bavli, where it says he covered v'shev b'veisecha, if you want to align it with Yerushalmi, so that means that be so well and stay home doesn't mean that he loses his position. It means he keeps his position. Doesn't mean he's actually losing his position.
There's no impeachment.
Yeah.
There is a case.
Yeah.
It's a one-time thing
According-
that continues to.
according to this reading, yeah. So problem is there's actually a bit of a steer. He says you have this, the place can bring this halacha that Talmud Chacham shesarach, we don't put him in nidui. But then you also have the halacha that if someone is, I think we had yesterday, that if his son is shmuase, if his behavior it's causing an uproar, it's causing waves, people are talking about his bad behavior, we do put him in chayrim. So how are both true? So he says from the Rambam it seems like Perek Vav, yesterday's Rambam he said Chacham shmuase ra, and here in Perek Shvi he starts off Chacham zaken b'chachma. So it sounds like the distinction according to Rambam is yes, we're talking about a regular Talmud Chacham, and today we're talking about based on someone extra important. So from the Torah, it sounds like that the difference is that here it's talking about purely private behavior. No one actually found out what the person did. The authorities happened to find out that he did something inappropriate. And Sani Shmuase means that people are talking about it, that it's already out there. The Torah says that's the distinction. That if there's a Chil Hashem, then we take action. Says, according to, if you go with that approach in this situation, back to this scenario here, since people are talking about what the Rav did, it's public. So according to that opinion, we should be machmer. He says, according to the Rambam, if he's an av based in be'iroi, then we shouldn't. And someone says, and anyway, he gave an excuse, so it could be everyone would agree if there's no excuse. So that's the Tzemach Tzedek. People talk about it in today's day and age. Baruch Oberlander of Hungary wrote a whole piece on this in Haaretz over here in Sukkot, Tafshin and Tess, different sources. It's a whole interesting topic. There have been cases in Eretz Yisrael in recent years where they wrote shuvas about Rabbanim that were caught doing different things. It's a sort of a relevant topic. It just relates to this halacha. I'm just mentioning it, not paskening any halachas. Now that he mentioned this idea that we don't always hurry to give a chayrim, give a nidui, so now it goes back to actually a regular Talmud Chacham. So second part of halacha aleph. Now it's possible that really this should be considered halacha beis. I'm going to mention later why. Maybe they should actually be numbered as halacha beis, and the numbering should be different. But the next piece is v'chein kol Talmud Chacham shenes chayav nidui. Any Talmud Chacham who is deserving really. Asur lebeis and likpoitz. It's actually forbidden for based on to hurry, to rush the procedure. They try to avoid it, right? I mean, generally, is based in theory, could just postpone a case. Elsewhere, it talks about they shouldn't inui hadin if you postpone a case for no good reason. That's a bad thing. But in theory, based on just be inactive and not take action. So that's in this case, that's a recommended course of behavior, not to be all on top of it and right away. And the extra, particularly the pious sages, in the time of Chazal, they said about themselves, I was never involved. Nimnu meaning I wasn't part of the Beis Din, I wasn't part of the Herkav of Beis Din that was involved in putting Talmud Chacham in Nidui. Although someone like that wouldn't have a problem to be part of the Beis Din that gives that same person Malchus. Whether it's Malchus for something Minatera or it's just Malchus Mardus for behavior, if we need to beat the guy up, that's okay. But to put the Talmud Chacham in Nidui, that's something to be avoided. The sources in Moed Katan of Papa said, I never put a Talmud Chacham in Chayram. And in fact, so what happens? What if he deserves it? What if he's Mechayev Shamta? What do you do? He says the same thing what they do in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, when they need a Beis Din, so the people show up to, if they need a Beis Din to carry out Malchus, so people show up, they sign in. I'm here to approve it. When it comes to the Shamta, no one signs in. There's no one there. No one. There's no Beis Din to do it. They can't do anything. So that's what they did in Eretz Yisrael. So the Papa is essentially saying the same thing. That's what the Rambam is talking about. Now to move on to the Nidui itself.
Why?
Doesn't fully spell it out. I guess it's just not, a good look that the Talmud Chacham is being put in Nidui. It's not good that we're attacking him. Maybe it's not good that it doesn't look good for Klal Yisrael that Talmud Chacham are being publicly. Halacha base. How does it work? How does Nidui work? What's the actual process? What do you do? So, and you say, Pliny b'shamta. So first of all, we see right away, according to Rambam, the word nidui and the word shamta are synonymous. They mean the same thing. Because he says, what's nidui? You say, so-and-so is b'shamta. So is shamta. That's another word. The three words that are used in this kind of context. Cherem, nidui, and shamta. Sometimes you see the Rosh Tefis nachash. When you want to say that whoever violates such and such is going to be in cherem, you say b'gzeras nachash. Nachash stands for nidui, cherem, shamta. So those are three words that are used. But here the Rambam says that how do you do nidui? By saying you're in shamta or he's in shamta. So that's the language you use if he's not in front of you. So you say plaini. But from nidu b'fanav, if it's to his face, I'm going to see later about differences in halacha if it's to his face or not. But if it's in his face, if you say I'm in plaini zeh, this person. So because you still don't say you still say this person, but you're acknowledging that he's in front of you. That's for nidui. What about cherem? Cherem, for that you change the language. You say I'm in plaini machram. So and so is the cherem. No. We're going to see the difference very soon in Halacha Dal and Halacha Hey. What is the difference between a nidui and a cherem? But this is the difference. And then the Rambam adds v'arer by Allah by shvua by nidui. This is a lashon in the Gemara that the word arer means to curse. So and so is cursed. It has different connotations. It has the connotation of an actual curse. It has the connotation of swearing. And it has the connotation of putting someone in nidui. So if you look in Rashi in Shavuos, in Gemara Shavuos, he says kol l'sheres halalahu mishamish. It could be used for all three. But so it seems like based on the context, you have to understand what it's referring to. He says, Imar chacham arer b'lashon nidui. If the chacham said it in this context of nidui, so tzarich lifish mimenu, so then you have to stay away from that person. And if a person said to his friend arer to create an oath, and so then it creates an oath. No one's a nidui. You're creating an oath together by using the word arer. And if someone curses his friend and says arer, so then he's a makalo. Then he's a halacha of a makalo. So it all really depends on how you're using the word. But that word, because with these types of things, with nadarim, with shavuos, very particular about which word has which meaning or which word causes what. So this is a word where it actually has multiple meanings and multiple halachic powers depending on what you're using it. But I think it also says that, at least according to some, that when you say arer for a nidui, it is a more powerful nidui because it has that klala in it as well. Now, the Torah in Yeda Deya, Siman Shin Lamadal, which is the Siman which discusses the halachas of nidui and cherem, the Torah mentions that the Ravid actually disagrees with the Rambam. So we said that Rambam said that nidui and shamta are the same thing. How do you put someone in nidui? You say you're in shamta. So the Torah brings that the Ravid argues on the Rambam, and he says that shamta is actually more severe than nidui. And it really relates, there's a whole bunch of places in Shas, and Beis Yosef quotes a bunch of places in Shas to argue with the Ravid, and others respond to the Beis Yosef. We're not getting into that, but I just saw that someone pointed out something interesting. And the Achronim says that a lot of people taina that it's true the Ravid attacks the Rambam in his asagas in many places, sometimes rather harshly, but ultimately there's so many places where he doesn't attack the Rambam. Most halachas the Ravid doesn't have anything to say, so it's commonly said that means the Ravid actually agrees to the Rambam. I think the Rabbi also invokes it l'gabe Mashiach, wherever the Ravid didn't argue, so that means the Ravid agrees. But he says over here, it's interesting because the Ravid doesn't comment here on the Rambam in Halacha Beis, but in the Torah, the Torah is quoting the Ravid as disagreeing with the Rambam. So this might disprove, or at least it's a question, at least it has to be discussed. Here it seems like the Ravid had other points of disagreement with the Rambam that he didn't mention in his Asagas and Mishnah Torah. Okay. Now, how do you undo the nidui and the cherem? So that's the language. We're talking about the language here again. So we say this time we speak directly. We don't say plain yizeh. We say loch you shari loch. We undid it for you. It's forgiven to you. That's the wording, and that's the syntax. That's how we say it. And that's assuming that it's in his presence. And if it's being done not in his presence, so then you say plaini, that guy. Obviously, you don't say plaini. You actually say his name whenever it says plaini. So and so, shariloi umachuloi. So for him, so that's how you undo it. That's just the language. Now, what does it actually mean? What is nidui cherem? What does that actually? What's the significance? So, what is the practice? What does he actually do? What do we do with him? So, someone who is a menuda, someone who is a nidui, is not allowed to take a haircut. It's not allowed to wash his clothing, just like someone who is in mourning throughout the days of his nidui. And you can't count him in for a zimun, for benching. But like he can't be counted for a minion or anything that needs 10 people. But and you can't sit in his 4 amas. But it's not 100% because he can teach Torah to others. And others can teach Torah to him. V'niskar, he can be hired. V'seicher, he can hire others to work for him. So that's a menuda. Now the Ramad, v'emeis b'nidoy, what if he dies while he's still in a state of nidoy? It wasn't resolved before his death. So based in Shoychin Manichin Evan al Areinoi, based in put the stone on his aron, on his casket. It's like a symbolic of skila. The fisher who moved them in a tzibur because he died in nidoy, so he's sort of excommunicated even in death.
That is a component for everything.
I don't know if that means in Haba he has a problem or not, and I think you could be matter the nidoy theory after. I'm not sure, but
why skila?
Skila.
No, I'm saying why it's such a strong punishment.
Yeah, it's mentioned. I think it's mentioned in Adius with was it a Kabi ben Mahalal or something? I didn't look it up for the shir, but that he disagreed with them and he refused to back down, and he said, "I'd rather be a shaita to everyone else instead of being a shaita to Hashem." You see this concept. I don't know how often this was actually practiced, but in theory, this is something you might do. It goes without saying that there's no hespedim. We're not saying eulogies, and there's no levaya. There's no one's accompanying. He's completely he's excommunicated. Now the Kesef Mishnah quotes the Ramach. Besides the Asagas of the Raiva, there also the Asagas of the Ramach.
Someone has to stay there. Takes it off.
Oh, he's in the earth. I assume when they're carrying it.
But nobody dared to see it anyhow. Nobody's coming along.
From the windows, they're watching from the windows.
And the porch.
Yeah.
Nobody's coming along.
His family is also l'chayr
It's
can.
not like all of either.
But there's no keep everything falls away. They keep
In the
it
past,
open with the children, everything falls away.
They're available, but they're not following up.
You can't keep it from his own son.
I didn't predict that this halacha would be the subject of the most fascination. So I didn't. I have to say I didn't.
Never know.
Maybe there's a sefer in Hilchos Nidur that has a whole chapter on it. I don't know. I didn't. So the Ramach asks, what about taking off the shoes? Because in Gemara you find stories where Rabbi Eliezer, I think it's the famous story of Rabbi Eliezer and the Torah Leba Shemayim, that whole fight at the Tanur Shalach Noi. So they put him in Chayrim and it says he took his shoes off. And the Shalmi actually says clearly that someone who's in Chayrim has to take his shoes off. So why does the Rambam not mention anything about shoes? On the other hand, if you look up in the Gemara, it says the Gemara doesn't actually use Rabbi Eliezer as proof that you have to take the shoes off. So he says maybe Rabbi Eliezer talking when he took his shoes off, it was just an extra thing. According to the Bavli seemingly is assuming that it was just an extra thing. Yeah, it says he also sat down on the earth. I guess Rambam didn't mention that either, and I guess that's also not a requirement. And Ramach concludes, "Minhag b'chol eretz Sfarad shemenuda cheletz minala." But the minhag in Spain is that you do take the. So back then, nidur was very in vogue, was used a lot. And if we have time, I have a tshuva from the Rivash that relates to nidur. A lot of tshuvas about it. So he says the practice in Sfarad in reality was that they did to remove the shoes.
Yeah, in my country.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Carpet.
Right. I'm talking specifically for nidoy. Yeah. Now, so that's nidoy. What about chedem? Yasser al hamachram. So how does the guy in chedem? How does he go even further? She'enoi she'enela chedem. He can't teach others. Unlike the menuda vein she'en law, you can't teach him. Aval she'en hu la'atzma. He could teach. He could learn Torah to himself. So he shouldn't forget the Torah that he learned, which is actually what Hilchos Talmud Torah started off with about the person's chiyuv to learn. So we also were discussing the other day about how it's always a chiyuv to learn. So even a guy in chayrim, he still has mitzvahs Talmud Torah. We're not stopping him from learning by himself. So and he already.
What's the chiddush?
Because we said he can't teach others, he can't teach him. If he can't teach him, maybe he can learn. No. And he can't be hired for work even if you're not coming in contact with him, and you can't be hired for him. You can't do business with him. You really can't do anything with him. Just the minimum so that he can have what to feed himself. Halacha Vav. So now he's going to explain when do you do this, when do you do that. He says, Mishi Yashav ben Nidui Shleishin Yom Lebikish La'atida, Imanad Neis Shniya. So apparently, Stama Nidui is a 30-day thing. So if 30 days pass and he doesn't ask, doesn't request for it to be undone, so then you have to do it again. Yashav Shleishin Yom Lebikish La'atida. If you wait another 30 days and he didn't ask, Machrim Benoisai. And then we up it, it becomes a chedem. Now he starts discussing hatara. How do you undo a chedem? So, how many people do you need to undo the nidui and the chedem? B'shleisha, you need 3. I feel like you to see if they're nothing special. The regular people, you need 3. But yachid mumcha matar nidui levada. If there's a special yachid, an expert, then one guy he can do it himself. But yesh the Talmud lahatar nidui chedem. I feel rav, and the Talmud could actually do it on behalf of the Rav if he wants. He can undo the Rav's nidui. He can stand in for the Rav. Now, the Ravid disagrees. The Ravid says, so he says you can't just have 3 or just simple people. You have to know exactly how many people were involved to begin with, and you have to match that number, those people, their level of importance. That's the Ravid's disagreement with the Rambam here. Now, there's something interesting before we move on. If you look, there's Halacha Zayin, and there's Halacha Tes, and there's no Halacha Ches. So in the Rambam, in the Frankel Rambam, which is one of the Rambams where they go through all the different nischos, comparing the manuscripts, the print. So they say that the story is like this: in the Venice print, which is one of the first, in the year Shin Lamed Daled, which is also the first print the first time where they actually put numbering on the halachas, Aleph Beis Gimel. It was their initiative. So the halacha between Zayin and Yud is missing a number. It goes from Zayin to Yud, and the one in the middle doesn't have a number. And then the next print, in the Amsterdam print, so they decided to put a tes on it, but that means the ches is still missing. Now, there's actually a letter from the Rabbi about this, from Sivan Tavshin Memdal in 1984, to Rav Yitzchak Yedidia Frankel, who was the chief rabbi in Tel Aviv. He's the father-in-law of Rabbi Lau. The Rabbi writes, L'goydel ha'pliya de hashmatas halacha ches. Big, what's the story here? The Rabbi, it's like a big kasha. So he says, Chipasti meyaz. I was always looking to resolve this. Matzasi b'shinui neschos, and a certain print of Sefer Hamada, Tavshin Chavdal. I'm not sure which edition it is, but apparently one that has some more neschos in it. Shavakama vakama kisvei yad, a number of manuscripts. B'reish Perek Zayin, haschalas halacha beis lefnei tevas v'chein kol talmid chacham. So that paragraph that I pointed out, the second half of halacha aleph, it's a separate paragraph in the kisvei yad. So we can say that was meant to be halacha beis. So really, the whole numbering is really off. That should have been halacha beis and gimel daled, and now we're up to ches. Zion was ches, and then comes tes. That was how the Rebbe resolved. I mean, the Rebbe wanted not just to say that it was a typo. He wanted what was the explanation? How did it happen? So it was really the mistake was earlier. Yeah, once everyone's been signed to these halachas, I don't think, even if the Rebbe said that, I don't know if the Rebbe would want that the Rambam should be changed. Right, you think they'd point it out or something. I didn't see if they did or not, but the numbers are the numbers. I think that I could check. I think the Rebbe himself, in the same letter, I think the Rebbe is mitzaying to Halacha Zayin and Halacha Tes. In the very same letter, which the Rebbe discusses Halacha Zayin and Halacha Tes, he calls it Halacha Zayin and Halacha Tes. He didn't change what he called the numbers. So in Halacha Tes continues on this topic, and he says, Shleisha shenidu v'hochel lehen. If 3 people with someone in Nidui and they left, they're not here anymore. The chazir zeh midavar shenidu b'glaloi, and then this person he doesn't deserve it anymore. But in Shleisha achenim materially, 3 others can come. So the question is something going on here with Halacha Zayin and Halacha Tes. Halacha Zayin emphasized it could be even Hadjaitis, which the Rabbi disagreed with. And Halacha Tes, it emphasizes first of all that he Chazer boy, he's not deserving anymore, and also that they left. So what's the difference? What's happening here? So that's actually the main topic in the Rebbe's letter there to Frankel. And the Rebbe says that there's a sefer, Avodas HaMelech, and the Rebbe writes, Maharav Krakowski. This sefer is from the last 100 years. It's a Litvisher Rav. He made a chibur on the Rambam called Avodas HaMelech. Most of it was lost. We just have Sefer Hamada. We're still in Sefer Hamada now. The Rebbe quotes him as saying his answer seems good. He says that in Halacha Zayin, the context here is that the person who was menada, the person who caused the nidui, he wants to be matir. So he's actively saying, I want to be matir. So that's when you say b'shleisha and hadjaitis. We're not asking, was he chazer bar or not? The menada said, I want to undo it. So that's all you need to know. And Halacha Tes, the people that did it, they're just gone. They're not in the picture anymore. So now we have to first make sure that chazer boy, and then Shlosh Acherim can come and be matir. That was what the Rebbe quoted there. What if he doesn't even know who he has to talk to? Mishala Yada Mini Dohu. Somehow he knows he's a nidoy. Everyone knows he's a nidoy, but somehow something got lost in the transmission. He doesn't know who to go to. So how do we resolve it now? And Rabbi Samalach on this halacha, I looked it up. He says also, you see here again, it's all about you need the manada to agree. So you see the theme here more explicitly, that you need to know that person. Yeah, the nasi, he has the power, only he would have the power to override the problem of the manada not having agreed. That's only if Hochlan. If they left, if they made themselves unavailable, then no. So you would need the nasi. All right. Now, we didn't mention this, but in fact, the person can put himself in nidui. So the Rambam says nidui al tanai. This is in general nidui al tanai. If the nidui was given as a condition, if such and such, then there'll be nidui. I feel me piyatzmai, then I'm at. Even if he put himself in nidui, so that's what he says. If I don't do this thing, I'm being menad to myself. Tzarech hafara. So first of all, it doesn't matter if there's a tanai or not. Second of all, it doesn't matter if it's yourself. You still need hafara. Talmud chachamim shenida atzmai. If the Talmud chacham who did it himself. Even if he said, I'm being menad to myself, but if so-and-so agrees, if someone-so gives his approval, even if it's not just, sometimes the person can put himself in nidui for nothing. It's contrived. If I don't pick up the groceries, I'll be in nidui. That's obviously not something you're chayav nidui. But even if it was something for real, and he jumped ahead and he put himself in nidui. I based in quote for me, and I didn't answer the summons. I'm putting myself in nidui before anyone else be menad to me. Then he can do it. If it's a Talmud Chacham, then he can do it to himself, whether it's chayav, whether he's not chayav. Even if he said it's al das pleni, it doesn't mean that pleni is in charge now of being meifrid. He can still be meifrid himself. Now there's an interesting Ravid here. The Ravid says, why didn't Yehuda from the Shvatim, why didn't Yehuda be matir his own nidui? And he says, I have a question on myself. Why didn't Yakov undo his nidui? What's he talking about? In the Gemara Makkos, it says, this din, nidui al t'nai, tzarech hafara. Nidui, even if it's al t'nai, you need hafara. From where do you see from Yehuda? Yehuda said, if I don't bring Binyamin back, I'll be b'chatastilach. And we say it's a nidui, and elam haza, and an elam hava. So, but yet, we see that Yehuda was still a nidui after the whole story. And the assumption here, even though it's not said clearly, is that Yehuda did fulfill his t'nai. And we're going to see later, that's discussed. Did he actually fulfill his? Let's assume that he did. So what happened? Shmuel bar Nachmani said that it tells you Chiruvein ba'al yamis. So the drasha is that all 40 years that the Yidden were in the Midbar, Yehuda's bones were rolling around in the Aron. Until Moshe asked Rachmanus, and he said, who caused Reuven to admit to the thing that he did? Yehuda, b'zaisli Yehuda. It says Yechiru, the thing that Moshe says about the Reuven is relating to his Avera. And he continues, V'zaisli Yehuda. So it's V'zaisli Yehuda gets credit for Reuven admitting. Shema Hashem kol Yehuda, Hashem shall listen. So his limbs returned to their place. But they still didn't let him into Elam Haba. So this whole time he'd been out of the Yeshiva Shalmaila. So then he says, Ve'el Amit Tivianu. So they brought him in, but he still couldn't somehow, Lamaila, he wasn't able to participate in the learning. So that Moshe had a Yod of Rav Loi, so then he had the ability, but he still couldn't answer the questions. And Moshe said, Ve'ezer mitzarav tiyeh, and then Yehuda was finally back in the game. So Ravid's asking, why didn't Yehuda, if you just said that, who put Yehuda in Nidui? Yehuda put himself in Nidui, so why couldn't Yehuda take himself out of the Nidui? And on top of that, according to everybody, why couldn't Yakov take him out of the Nidui? It means for the rest of his life, Yehuda knew he was in Nidui, and no one was doing anything about it. What's going on? So also to understand the question, so the Kesef Mishnah says that the Rashba says that when you say that a person can undo his own nidui, the Rashba says that it's only if he puts himself in chayrim for no special reason. Like there's a certain case in the Gemara that whenever someone had to put someone else in nidui, he would put himself in nidui first, and then put that person in nidui. Then he would undo his nidui and undo that person's nidui. That was his procedure. So that's where we see this idea. But so the Rashba says that person's putting himself in nidui for no reason. Right. But who says that if they're about to put you in nidui for legitimate reasons and you jump the gun and put yourself in nidui first, who says you're in charge now? It wasn't for you to put yourself in nidui here. You would have to work it out with the people who are going to put you in nidui. You can't claim that I put myself, so I'm in charge now. I took over my own case. Yeah. But he could always still come and resolve it. So what's the?
He didn't ask for resolve. Yeah,
so that's the question. Why didn't Yakov? We're asking that. So he says. So first of all, when the Rabbi is asking on the Rambam, so it seems like he holds like the Rashba. So the case of Yehuda, according to the Rashba, Yehuda apparently does deserve to be needy. Even that's questionable. Some of us say, why would you just because Yehuda doesn't bring back Binyamin, that means he's objectively chayav neither. But for the case of mishnah, for the Rabbi seems to be assuming that according to the Rashba, according to the Rabbi, this would be a case where Yehuda can't undo his chayim because he really deserved it. But according to the Rambam, it said that you could even undo your own chayim even if you deserved it. So that's a question on the Rambam. Why is the Rambam? How's the Rambam going to end for Yehuda? So now the case of mishnah is what's the Rambam going to say? So he said, if you promise to do something for someone else, then when the Rambam said, I'll das plani, that's only if you just mix them in for no reason. But if you told someone, I'm going to do this for you, and if I don't do this for you, I'm going to be in nidui because of what I did to you, then it's that person's choice. You handed it over to that person. It's that person's decision now. So the Rambam would say that Yehuda is not in charge of his own nidui anymore. Now, what about the question? What about Yakov? Why couldn't Yakov do it? So he says, for Karat, he did what he was supposed to do. He brought Binyamin. He brought him to Yakov. Rabbi Bachai says that he actually brought Binyamin back to Eretz Yisrael. Now, not everyone agrees with that. But if you say they brought him back to Eretz Yisrael, so they thought that you don't need a Torah. Now, the Gemara is saying, meaning even if you fulfilled the Tanai, you would still need a Torah. And Yaakov and Yehuda didn't know that, so that's how Yehuda ended up the rest of his life in Nidui without ever knowing it. But Yehuda promised to bring Binyamin back. So if Yakov comes to Mitzrayim, maybe he didn't fulfill his Tanai. He promised to bring him back. So it's not
technicality that
the Kesef Mishnah says he dafka brings the Bein Bachai. It's not enough. The Kesef Mishnah doesn't think it would be enough to say that he brought Yakov to him. Okay, you have to finish off. Halacha Yud Beis Mishnah Yidu B'Chaloim. So now, what if it happens in a dream? Even if he knows who is in the dream, or I don't know if he knows who's in the dream, or he knows that someone elsewhere put him in nidui and that's why he dreamt about it. But no, once it's in a dream, has a special halacha. You need 10 people who learn halacha. They're on that level of learning to undo his nidui. If you can't find parsa, he has to walk up to a parsa to find them. You can't just say, I couldn't find. Then, what if you went up to a person? You still couldn't find them. Then it's enough to find 10 who learn Mishnah. If you didn't find those, those who could at least learn read Torah. If you can't find those, then even some 10 who can't learn read Torah. If you didn't find 10 at all, he lives in a place where there's no minion. Yud Gimel, and Yud Gimel is rather long. Mishnah do b'fanav b'fanav. If the nidui was in his face, in his presence, you have to be matter in his presence. You do shalei b'fanav. If it wasn't in his presence, then it could either be not in his presence, like the way it was, or if you want to do it in his presence, that's fine. But in bein nidui la'afar klum, I think that means that it doesn't have to be any space. It's not like you have to wait at least an hour or a day. You can put the nidui and take it off. If you just want to intimidate someone, you're a nidui. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, you're not a nidui. Not a problem. Based on but if based on wants to leave him for many years, if that's what they think is the right thing to do, for whatever, it's really up to Based-On. Based-On's calling the shots, so they can do whatever they want. So they can, if he deserves it, so it's for years. What if they want to jump straight to Chayim and not go through the nidui first? So they want it automatic that no one can even learn with all that extreme stuff. They could do that. Or to put people who violate the Chayim in Chayim themselves. Those who do those things that they shouldn't be doing, they could put them in Chayim. Actually, it's all sort of based on extrajudicial powers to do whatever they feel is necessary to keep people in line. Now circling back to how we got into this about the Chacham who got his honor was slighted and he wants to put a nidui, even though he could. We're not saying he should. That's not a great thing to do. He just ignores it. He shouldn't pay it heed. Just quoting about not minding things. Just don't care. We had this already earlier by Kiddush Hashem and Chil Hashem. We had this earlier by Deis, and here it's coming up again. The best thing is not to care. Not just not to answer, to actually actively forgive. And the Chacham would say, "Oh, I'm so great," in a positive way. I never did this. I never put someone ahead of my honor. But this is the right path. So that's only if it's a private thing. But if it was public, a public shaming, then now the Tam Chacham doesn't have permission anymore to forgive. And he gets punished if you forgave. Busy in Torah. It's not just himself here at stake, it's the whole Torah. He's embarrassing Torah. You have to take real revenge. Until he asks for forgiveness, and then it's forgiven. It's the CM of Hilchos Talmud Torah.
Yeah.